Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Every month I like to make some of my own scrapbooking supplies based on inspiration. Sometimes I go big, sometimes I go small. This month I want to talk about taking ordinary supplies and just sprucing them up a little bit to add just a little something extra to make them pop. And in the end, we will have turned the ordinary into something just a little bit more special. And before we dive in, I just want to let you know that all of these ideas were inspired by these products over at DLS Design. And every month I get my inspiration from existing products in the world, and I like to give credit where credit is due. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with that idea of the star print, and let me show you the inspiration here. It was this piece. And I have doodled entire pattern papers in the past, but I wanted to let you know that you don't have to start from scratch. You can take a piece of paper that you already have that has some of the elements there and then work it to what you want it to be. So to create these little stars, I am just making these curvy lines in between the shape of a plus sign. So you can see that I've given you an example of how that works there. And then I'm just going to do a little bit of practice on a scratch piece of paper. And I'm going to try and get these things as small as I can to fit them amongst the polka dots on that existing paper. So if we zoom in here a little bit, you can see that I'm going to go ahead and add in a few stars here and there. And that inspiration piece also had some open circles as well as some polka dots. And then I'm adding just a few little speckles with my pen as well. And this is a white gel pen called Milky Pop, and I will link you up to that below. It is quickly becoming my new favorite white pen. I used to use the Signo Uniball a lot, and I got a little frustrated with them drying up on me. But so far, I'm really liking this Milky Pop pen. It does start off a little more translucent and it dries a little more opaque. And here is a close-up look at how that doodling with this white pen is looking so far. And because I am starting with an existing polka dot print, I don't have to spend as much time on this doodling project as I have on past prints. So that's a good reason to start with a pre-existing product so that you can add something extra to it without spending hours and hours. I probably sat down and watched a TV show with my husband and did this in maybe half an hour or so, and I just had fun making little marks and just filling in gaps here and there as I saw fit. So that was one idea. Let's move on to some washi tape. You can alter your washi tape. Here I'm going to use some alcohol ink markers. A lot of washi tapes will have a kind of a slick coating to them, and so that makes water-based markers not as feasible. Test out your washi tape, see what you've got. So I had this plain checked print, which is fine. I like it just as it is, but I saw the inspiration piece and having those little, when I sat down to do this, I thought they were like plus signs. And then I realized later when I went back to add the graphic to this video that they were X's. So I did go back and make a second strip with X's, but now I have both. So that is okay. And I thought that washi tape was just so fun. Having these bright pops of color on something that was already, just basic and usable. This just adds something fun and extra to it. So let me talk a little bit about alcohol markers while I do this. I know a lot of people are nervous about alcohol markers and want to avoid them, partially because of the cost and partially just because it's another thing that you have to worry about in your supplies. However, alcohol markers are great for altering your existing stash. Like you can color on acetate embellishments, you can alter enamel dots into whatever color you want, and draw on chipboard and wood veneer and buttons and on and on. So alcohol markers really are a very flexible supply. So even if you just have a couple of colors in your stash, that will open up some interesting options for you. And there are definitely more affordable brands on the market than the Copics that I have. In fact, I was planning a video on altering supplies with alcohol markers and inks. And if that's something that would interest you, drop me a comment and I can push that project closer to the top of my list. All right, so that is that quick idea on zhuzhing up your supplies. Let's go ahead and move on to something that I worked on that was a little more complicated, and that is replicating this kind of scallopy, scaly print. And you could do this many ways. You could stamp it, you could doodle it. Neither of those were going to work for me, but the supply that I did have that would work was a 3D embossing folder by Spellbinders, and I will link you up to that product below. Anytime you use my shopping links, I earn just a small commission on that, and I really do appreciate the support that that provides to me, so thank you. So I showed you that example that I created, and I did have some challenges with this project. It took me a long time to figure out how to work this project so that all of those graphics line up. And because I'm using a card maker's embossing folder to create a 12 by 12 pattern paper, this isn't gonna fit. So I had to cut panels of cardstock and then figure out how to get those patterns to align. So let me share with you the best tips that I have for this. So the Spellbinders embossing folder is really nice because it is on the larger size. A lot of card making embossing folders are about a little over 4¼ by 5½. But because this one is larger, I can cut my cardstock panels to 4x6s, and that means I only have to run 6 of these panels through. So I'm going to start with these 6 panels. I'm going to flip them over and number them on the back. That is really going to help me keep track of things. You can see I already have the first panel numbered with a number 1. I'm just going to use some pencil to do this. It's on the back, so and we're going to glue all this stuff down to another sheet of cardstock, so you won't ever see these numbers. That is just to help make this project flow. All right, when I start this first panel, I'm going to pick a nice straight line both on the left edge and on the top edge just to get started. I'm going to mark those lines with a nice tacky but not too tacky tape. And I really like this Spellbinders craft tape for this particular. I have a couple different tapes that I like for various uses, and this one is better for holding in place through working on things. So here you see me applying that tape to the very top edge of this scallop motif, and then I'm picking a line that goes through the center of the scallops on the left edge. It's just a line I picked to allow a little bit of wiggle room for me to move the cardstock inside of this folder so that I could get everything to align as I'm working on future panels. And hopefully this will all make sense a little bit more as we go through this process. And I can say as I work on this tape that this should work with any kind of repeated design, so you don't have to have this specific embossing folder to use it. Look through your stash and see if you have something that could work. All right, I've misted the back of my cardstock, which is super helpful when using 3D embossing folders, or really any embossing folder, but especially 3D. And then I am going to align the front of my paper against that face plate of the folder that I put the tape. Embossing folders, you could use either side of the design, so decide which side you want to be the front and mark that with the tape so that you are consistent with doing all of your other papers. All right, I'm putting it with the appropriate sandwich through my die cut machine. Again, 3D embossing folders need a different sandwich when you're running them through your machine, so make sure you know that before you get started. All right, so I've got my first panel done. It's nice and even on the left and the top, and that is going to help everything align up better for working the next panel. So I am going to turn this upside down, and the basic idea that we're trying to get here is to butt those papers up against each other in the embossing folder so that it's as if we had a continuous piece running through the machine. Now you can cut strips of this and slide it through your embossing folder. That has some challenges to it, so I just chose to do it this way. And what I'm doing here is I am taking that pre-embossed piece and I am kind of locking it into place in the embossing folder. Now that can take a little bit of work to do, and here's one tip. If you start it off where it was and then just kind of slide it until it locks into place as it moves, and it will lock differently depending on the pattern that you've got going on, but I find each click where it locks into place, and this works way better with 3D embossing folders than it does with other embossing folders, but it is still doable no matter what style of folder that you have. So I'm shifting it, and I think I have one more shift to go here. And I really want to show you this process so you know that this isn't, perfectly easy to do. you do need to be patient and work with this. All right, so I've shifted it one more time so that I can see where my tape basically is. And while you don't have to see the tape, you just need enough room for your next panel of cardstock to fit. All right, and I'm kind of tacking that temporarily in place so it doesn't shift any more on me. And I'm going to take my other panel. Remember, you want the face side facing into the embossing folder. I'm spraying the back again. I'm going to go ahead and butt it up against that previous print, and that's going to help that print just flow right onto the next piece. I want to make sure it's aligned evenly with the top so that we've got a continuous flow of that pattern again. All right, I will use a couple more pieces of tape. These ones are kind of newer, stronger adhesive on there. I am removing just a little bit of the tacky with my skin to get them on there so that it won't tear my paper when I take it off, because this tape is stronger and it could tear, especially on if your paper is damp. You want to make sure that it dries before you peel that tape off. All right, so I've got my two panels side by side, and you can see that my pattern is pretty continuous. It's not going to be exact, but that's okay. I'm not going for exact. I'm going for good enough. So I'm going to repeat that same process. I take panel number 2 and I'm going to lie it in my embossing folder until it clicks into place. And you notice that it's clicking into a slightly different position than the first one did. And the closer you get to the edge of that folder, the rougher it is going to be to get it to click into place. So using that tip of starting it off in the middle and sliding it over really can help. All right, so I'm butting my third panel up against that second one. I'm making sure it's aligned with my marked tape there at the top. I got it a little bit off, so I'm going to try it again. Here we go, getting it to line up. And you can see on the back of my hand, I've got those leftover pieces of tape from doing the previous panels, and I'm going to tack them down to the driest portion of my cardstock because that is less likely to tear the paper. But remember, when you're working on the back, if you get a little bit of tearing, don't worry, because we're going to glue all that stuff down anyway. All right, panel number 3 is done. And now I've got basically a 6x12 strip of this. You could stop there and just use, that as a row for your project, but I'm going to go ahead and create a full 12x12. So we need to realign our strips of marking tape there to match up with the bottom of that first panel, because our next panel is going to align to the bottom of that. So I am locking that into place, I'm tacking it down, and then I'm going to flip that over and work with moving that marking tape down. You can see, again, we've got that same idea of just helping the pattern flow as if it's continuous down the paper. All right, I've pulled up my tape. I love this tape because it is very forgiving with reusing it over and over again. So that is a great thing about this Spellbinders tape. I will also link you up to that tape because I use it in my die cutting life all the time. I did not need to move the left-hand piece of tape because it is already marking the left-hand side of the paper. All right, off camera, I just repeated those exact same steps from the top row that I did with the bottom row. Once that new tape placement is in place, it's the same thing where you do your first panel, then pop it in and line up your second panel, and so on and so forth, and just repeat it for the bottom row. All right, I have shifted my video back to the piece that I created earlier with the teal because that was my intended color for this piece. I was just using that gray as filming the tutorial part because I had messed up all of my teal paper. I am putting this teal piece together just by putting adhesive right up against the edge of these pieces as close as I can get, because the closer you get your adhesive to the edge, the tighter the seams will be when you glue these pieces into place. And I do really bump that up there and then press it flat from seam to edge and get nice tight panels. And once the entire thing is glued down with all the panels, I will trim off any raggedy edges because that's likely to happen. All right, I have one more quick idea to share. I really loved this diagonal pinstripe paper, and I went to my stash and I started working on this in multiple ways. I had a paint marker that was running out of ink. I was trying to use various edges to draw straight lines across because I'm going on the diagonal of the paper and my ruler is only 12 inches and paper diagonal is 17 inches. And that wasn't working. So I was playing with washi tape and I thought, well, maybe I'll just use washi tape as the white lines instead of marker. And then I ran out of washi tape and then I pulled out a stencil. Anyway, after much experimentation, I decided that since my ruler wasn't going to fit, I needed an edge that I could make fit. Now, in the past, I have used this kind of paper edge as a guide, but it is a little bit wobbly. And since I'm going to be pushing a pin up against this edge, I'm pulling out my second favorite tape in my stash. This one is the mint tape from scrapbook.com. And it is much lower tack. It is more like a post-it note kind of tack than the Spellbinders tape is. And so I do find that I need both kinds of tape in my crafty life. I was trying to do this straight edge idea with washi tape. And even though I was detacking it, it was tearing my paper. And so this tape has just the right amount of tack to be reusable without tearing the paper. So I am using that same Milky Pop tape, and like I'm explaining here, if you're butting up against a ruler, it's going to stay in place and really follow the edge of the ruler. But because I'm using very flat tape, it has the tendency to skip over the edge of the tape. So I am applying pressure to my pin towards the tape edge, in this case, kind of towards the left as I go. And as I'm working, it is skipping some, and I'm realizing that I am drawing on the textured side of my cardstock, and that actually is a mistake. I need to flip my paper over and do this on the smooth side of the cardstock. So after a couple of skipping, I think I skip here again, I decide that's what I need to do. All right, I've got my paper flipped back over. I am realigning it with my grid. I am going corner to corner, making sure that the edge of my tape is slightly lower than the corner of the paper so that my pin nib fits in that edge. All right, reveal here, and you can see how smoothly that tape removes from my paper without tearing. And now I'm going to mark 1/2 inch tick marks on either side of my paper so that when I take my tape back in, I can easily realign it there, and then I continue drawing lines down here. Now I have sped this up a little bit. It will take you a little bit longer. And as you put pressure on the edge of that tape, it will kind of wrinkle and crinkle the tape. So each time you use it and for the next mark, go ahead and press it firmly down along that edge. And that way it'll help resolve any issues of skipping, or even the pin nib can lift up the tape and kind of end up drawing under the tape. But remember, you can always turn the tape around and use the next edge of the tape, and you may need to use more than one piece of tape to accomplish this project, and that's okay because this tape is still reusable for other things. I will put it in a little folder that I have and save it for other messier mixed media projects because it's still perfectly usable for that. And you can see that's my folder with all of my saved tape for the past. All right, here is the one that I accomplished with the stencil, and you can see it has some really rough lines where the stencil didn't align very well. And here's the piece that I created with the mint tape, and you can see that it is much smoother, and I'm much happier with the results of that. So that wraps up the ideas that I have for you today. We've made 4 projects, mostly simple projects, and I hope I shared some tips and tricks and ideas for you to take back to your own crafty life. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, have an artful day.